Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the fourth edition of the Hong Kong View. Myself and Tim Carroll. Tim, it's been a relatively quiet week for racing for a change this week, and it's a somewhat pleasing one on the whole.
Yeah, look, they say sometimes no news is good news. I suppose that might be the case this week.
So starting things off, we're going to look back at Sha Tin. Obviously, there was nothing really major in the racing world to talk about. Zac Purton, we'll talk quickly about him. Dominated on Sunday with a treble, and So We Joy, in my opinion, was probably one of the best rides out of the three, where he come from the clouds, had no luck in running, turning in, found the gaps when they came, and managed to get up right in the shadows of the post. And it sums up Zac Purton at the moment. I think prior to that, he was at a 44% strike rate. So when you're on fire, things just happen for you.
Yeah, last couple of meetings until the one just gone on Wednesday. In fact, Joe Moreira was on the sideline serving a band, and Zac came out and rode a 5-timer and then a 3-timer. He was 30 behind, then he was 22 behind. Look, he's long odds to pick up Joe Moreira this season, but at least he's given himself a little bit of a shot. And I suppose you've got to remember at one point last year or last season, I think he was about 15 or 16 behind, and he ended up winning the title. So you wouldn't say it's beyond the realms of possibility, but he is a wonderful rider. As far as So We Joy goes, taking the dropping grade, that's worked the Oracle. It was a little bit of a hard watch for myself because he's a horse I've flagged up a couple of times, once when he won, mostly when he's got beaten. Of course, he came out and won last time. But yes, it was a very good performance. The dropping grade worked the Oracle.
We mentioned about Flagship Glory as well. I think it was your pick on Sunday, part of your ATR column. He duly obliged as well. He's just missed a cut for the Hong Kong Derby, which we'll touch upon later on. He's part of the reserve list. Whether or not he'll get a run, it remains to be seen. It's looking highly unlikely at the moment. But there was also some sort of controversy around the whole getting into the Derby with congratulations as well. But we'll touch upon that later. Tim, Flagship Glory looks a very smart horse on the up.
Yeah, and the run was a lot better than the bare form would suggest. He won by a narrow margin, but the race did not pan out for him at all. He made a hash at the start. They went ridiculous for him as far as the pace goes, way too slow. I think he did very well to win the race. He wouldn't have been, he might still get in. He wouldn't be without an each-way shout in the Derby as well. I don't know whether he's quite got the turn of foot that you might need to win the Derby, but he'd certainly run the trip. But yeah, look, it was a very good performance. Like I said, a narrow margin, but a lot better than the bare form would say.
I think in terms of that ride, I think it's a ride you could show any young jockey in terms of how to be composed and cool when things don't go right. Because as we mentioned before, he broke terribly out the gates and was beyond the 8 ball straight away. But Zac, being a world-class rider he is, stayed cool and composed, trusted his mount and got him through and won quite well in the end, as we mentioned.
Yeah, despite the fact that they went very slow and everything on the front dominated the race, he was the only one to come from the back of the field to win it, and hence why I say it was a better run than what it looked on paper. But you're right. Zac actually said afterwards, once he blew the start, he ended up where he was, and they dropped anchor on the front. He kind of thought that his chances were gone, but he persevered. He won. He came out afterwards and also said that he's the sort of horse that would actually fit well for the Derby. But as you've mentioned, at this stage, I believe he's actually the first reserve. So you never know. I mean, nothing's going to come out unless there's a problem, but at least he's going to be first cab off the rank.
And looking at the final race, Butterfield completed the treble for Zac Purr, and there was a few Derby bubbles burst here. I think Super Football, I was really disappointed with him. I fancied him to run quite well here. He didn't really run to form. Berlin Tango and Sa, another 2 disappointments, 2 former English European horses as well. But Butterfield, he's got the form in behind Poundfield, who I think is going to be a solid contender each way for the Derby, and it was come through quite well and took advantage of some poor showing really from the likes of Super Football and Berlin Tango as well.
Yeah, it's difficult to get a handle on the form in South America, but he was really good in South America. He won 3 Grade 1s, and in fact, he was first past the post in all 4 starts at Group 1 company. He did get disqualified from 1 race. Then he went to Hong Kong, and he's always been pretty handy. He's always been very honest. He doesn't have the best strike rate, and I suppose you've got to sort of assume that the form in Hong Kong's a fair bit stronger than the form in Brazil. But he's a very nice. He's a very honest horse, I suppose you would say. He needs things to go his way. Nothing. There's nothing wrong with his attitude. I just mean he needs the race to set up the right way for him. But it was good to see him get the victory. He's another one I've flagged up a few times with a little bit of mixed success, but again, I wasn't on him on the weekend. But anyway, maybe next time.
So moving into the Hong Kong Derby picture, it's something we're not going to touch upon too much because we've got the Derby next week and we've got our special coming up. But looking through the field's been announced here. The likes of Excellent Proposal, Sky Darcy, Healthy Happy, Shadow Hero. Then four are around the top four rated horses from 100 to 103 to 100. Tourbillon Diamonds, well fancied by some. Lucky Express, Russian Emperor, who I think has got a good chance here and he could be peaking at the right time. Panfield, we just mentioned, Congratulations. Silver Express, Maximus, Packing Waltham, and Delightful Last complete the lineup. Tim, there's no Golden 60 or Rapper Dragon in terms of we've seen last year. There's no standout superstar here, and it's quite a wide open renewal.
Yeah, look, I agree with you, what you say about the X8 O'Brien runner. I think it was a very good run last time out. But we just need to trust him to turn up again because his first couple of runs he didn't really show a lot. But he probably should have won last time. He was very wayward and straight. He ran around a little bit. But if he can get his act together on the day, I think he'll take a fair bit of beating. Excellent Proposal's probably the most consistent out of all the runners, and he'll certainly enjoy the step up to 10 furlongs. I'll tell you a horse that hasn't had a lot of luck at a couple of runs, but he has been running on. He's Packing Waltham. He's going to be a bit of a price. He'll be out of those that are going to be at double figures. He'd be my play. I think he might surprise a few people, but I don't really want to, nail my colours to any particular runner at the moment because, as you say, it's probably going to be 7-2, 4-1 the field, and I just want to see the final field and where they draw.
I mean, look at the rest of the field. We mentioned about Panfield, and I've said before, my concern with Panfield would be if it turns into a sprint, he's just going to be left behind because he's a horse to me who will eventually probably go up in trip and contest maybe staying races. He looks quite, in all fairness, he doesn't look just the quickest and he's quite slow. And I hope Tony Millard doesn't mind me saying that, but he looks to me like if things don't go his way and he gets outpaced, he'll be sticking on, but I just think he lacks that gear change to really be a serious contender and winning such a race of this magnitude over this distance.
There's nothing wrong with that. If you have a look at a horse like Exalt, the reigning horse of the year, he's never really had a big turn of foot. I'm not saying he hasn't got a turn of foot, but it's quite minimal. His strength is he can keep going at a decent bat for a long way. A little bit Highland Real. There's a good example. He never had a big turn of foot. He was just a relentless galloper. He'd just get going. You put him on quick ground and, over 2,400 metres, he was probably just about as good as anything in the world at that time. I agree with you. I personally think he's probably going to find the field a little bit sharp, and he hasn't got that turn of foot. But look, he's a nice type going forward. I think potentially he's going to be better once he steps up to 12 furlongs. And I would think at the moment, even though he's got a long way to go, Connections are sort of thinking a year down the track, we'll be aiming at those big 12 furlong races in Hong Kong.
So looking at the rest of the field, Congratulations sneaks in here after one run in Hong Kong, formerly known as Monarch of Egypt when trained by Ed O'Brien. He was a horse who, we talk about his European form last season. He ran well in the Guineas last season behind Siskin at the Curragh, and I fancied him to run really well in the Jersey, but he totally blew the start, and he managed to get back on level terms, but by which he got to the front, and he just got out-battled in the end. He's come over here now, trained by Douglas White. He's run okay on his first start here, but there seems to be a little bit of a question mark as to why he's got in and something like Flagship Glory's missed the cut.
Yeah, look, and I can understand what they're basing it on. You've got to remember, unlike, say, the Kentucky Derby where you have to qualify, there can be discretion here from the club, and they've used a little bit of a discretion. What their argument would be is Congratulations is rated, I think it's £5 higher than Flagship Glory. The other side of that, or the other side of the coin, is Flagship Glory's got form over a mile. Congratulations hasn't. Flagship Glory definitely gives you the impression 10 furlongs is going to be right up his alley. And probably a big one for most people is he's been in Hong Kong, he's had a few starts and he's won there. Congratulations only had the one start. And to be fair, it wasn't a Class 1. You've got to remember Flagship Glory won a Class 3. And he didn't run too badly over the 7 furlongs, but I suppose from a 10 furlong perspective, he hasn't really shown us much as yet. So I can see why there's plenty of controversy here, but again, it's 12 of one, a dozen of another. The rating has to mean something, and I suppose you just got to trust the club. I think the thing is that if you line both of them up tomorrow in a match race over 10 furlongs, I've got no doubt Flagship Glory goes off favourite, and that's kind of the point most people are making. But that's the system, I suppose. That's how it works. And sometimes I've seen it with the Cox Plate. Sometimes the club will get a lot of flack for making the call they do, and then they end up being proven right. Sometimes they're proven wrong. Sometimes they're proven right, and I suppose we'll find out on Sunday week.
Looking through the rest of the field here, there's a horse called Tourbillon Diamond who's been making quite a lot of noise. And I know a couple of people over in Hong Kong have tipped him up to run quite well here. He's run quite consistently. He finished him behind Healthy Happy in the Classic Cup last time with Russian Emperor in there, Shadow Hero in there, Excellent Proposal completing the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and Packing Waltham in sixth, and then Sky Darcy in seventh. So effectively, there's the half of the Derby field in that race. But would he be a horse who you think could throw down a major challenge here? I mean, he was beaten favourite last time as well.
I'm pretty sure, I'll stand corrected, I haven't got the form in front of me, but I'm pretty certain he was placed in the Australian Turf Club Derby, which is
I think he was, yeah.
Australia. The only thing I would say, him and Excellent Proposal were right next to each other last time, and they both finished off well enough. And then the race, they probably didn't go quick enough on the front end to suit either. But I thought Excellent Proposal had a tougher run in that. So just based on that, I kind of thought that Excellent Proposal's effort last time out in the second leg of the Classic Series was a better effort than his. But there hasn't been much between them a couple of times. So again, it's one of these things too. You've got to remember, we're going to have a look at the race, see how we think it's going to set up, and then we've got to have a look at the draw. I know it's over 10 furlongs, but all those sort of things are so important. I know over here in 10 furlong races, I'm sure you can think of exceptions, but maybe we don't put as much emphasis on the draw. On those tighter tracks, like we have in Hong Kong, you've got to have a look at the draw because it can be the difference between winning and losing. But again, if you line those two up over 10 furlongs tomorrow, I'd want to be in a match race. I'd want to be on Excellent Proposal.
And also looking at the rules as well, Joe Moreira's confirmed to ride Sky Darcy. That's probably a concern for Panfield backers because he's obviously had the connection with Panfield too. But he must obviously think, looking at the two, that Sky Darcy must have the better chance of the two.
Yeah, he's a funny one because coming into the series, Joe literally had to pick 4 or 5 runners, and it's the one he's gone with and he's stuck with. And in the first leg, I thought he was a bit disappointing. Last time out, it sort of left a lot of unanswered questions because he had no luck. Will he run the 10 furlongs? I don't think he'll run it as well as a few others, but you do have a powerful, you've got powerful connections there. You've got a horse that the jury's still out on his last run. He's obviously got plenty of ability, but I just kind of get the feeling that this time next year we'll be talking about his exploits over the mile, not over 10 furlongs.
Looking back at the barrier trials during the week, we had dual Australian Group 1 winner Shadow Hero. He came out and barrier trialled, and also Healthy Happy barrier trial too. Shadow Hero here, trialled back on the turf. What did you make of that, Tim?
Yeah, I thought it was a nice trial. I also thought it was a lot better effort last time out when they rode him a little bit more patiently to start before they put him on the front end, and he didn't really show a lot over the concluding stages. And when you look at his form, and he is a Group 1 winner, when you look at his form, he normally runs better. I mean, he's not a hold-up type that has to be right out the back with the wash-in or anything like that, but he certainly runs his best if you can just tuck him away because he's got a nice turn of foot on him. He's certainly best if he's ridden that way. And again, it's a really open derby. I know we're sort of basically saying all of them have got a chance, but he's another one that's definitely got a chance in the race this year.
So I mentioned about the draw in the Derby and the 2,000 metre start. Just how important is it to get the right sort of barrier? Would you want to be drawn ideally on the inside or would you want to be drawn on the outside? Because it's not a long run into that first turn. And I can imagine if you're drawn on the outside, it's going to be a lot harder to get over and get cover compared to being on the inside barriers. You're out and basically up the rail straight away.
It's going to depend on what sort of horse you're on. Hairpin tracks, if you're on a horse that wants to go forward, it goes without question. You want to be drawn 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You don't want to be drawn out in 11 or 12. If you've got a horse that wants to be held up, you probably don't want to be down in 1, 2 or 3 because potentially you're going to end up pinned up against the paint with 4 or 5 in front of you, directly on the paint. And if you're on the outside, and you're going to need plenty of luck. So when people sort of say, what sort of, where would you prefer to be drawn? Well, it depends on the horse. Also depends on the likely race setup. For instance, if you're a horse that goes forward and you're drawn out in, say, 10 or 11, but there's no pace underneath you, it's not really going to matter too much. If there's 2 or 3 underneath you that want to go quickly, which quite often is, not always, but quite often the case in Hong Kong, well, then you're probably in a little bit of trouble before the race even gets underway. So I think most riders would say, and I know I'm going back a few years in my day, is if you're in a field of 12 or 14, you just want to draw the middle because it gives you a little bit of an each way play, if you know what I mean. But certainly if you're on a horse that's going to go forward, you want to be drawn low.
Looking back at Happy Valley yesterday, we're going to kick things off here talking about Stock Legend. Pretty simple, cosy win. He tracked Whiskey Neat all the way around, and Whiskey Neat's always been slightly prone to being run down by a late finisher. Joe was very clever, tracked the pace, used the pace and win quite cosily, and it was a good return for the favourite backers here.
Yeah, he's been in pretty good form this campaign as well. I think that's his third win of the bout, 5 or 6 starts. The race set up very nicely for him. Conversely, the start before, when he was turned over, they went like bats out of hell, and he had an awful run, and he understandably stopped over the last half furlong or so. But yeah, look, it was a very good effort, and you kind of think that as he goes up through the grade, certainly when he gets up in grade next time, and he goes off a lighter weight, he'd be a player as well. Once again, I thought the run of the third horse was very good because the race did not set up for him whatsoever. Look for him probably. When I say probably, look for him when there's a bit more pace in the race. Like the previous start, I think he ran second. Again, I haven't got it in front of me. My computer's crashed. My other one, but he was runner-up. And he was second or third anyway, and he absolutely flew home. He hasn't got a lot of mileage on the clock. So the third horse is also another one I'd take out of that.
Looking back, I saw Travel Day took 49th at the 49th attempt of asking. He finally broke his Hong Kong maiden. But I saw a tweet for, I think it was Graham Cunningham. Looking back at some of his European form, he was pipped by Air Force Blue on debut, and at his best, he was rated 106. And we all know how good Air Force Blue was as a 2-year-old. He really bombed as a 3-year-old, putting it quite nicely. He bombed in the Guineas. I was at the July Cup when he went there in that summer as well, and everyone was saying 6 furlongs he'll show his best. He didn't turn up that day either. But Travel Day tuck here. He's off the mark finally, and it perhaps took a little bit longer than most would have thought.
Well, he ran second in the Railway Stakes as well. They tried him at Grade 1 level. He didn't run too badly in the Phoenix, again behind Air Force Blue. And to be fair, Air Force Blue was a very good 2-year-old. He might not have gone on with it, but he was a good juvenile. I think Washington, D.C., a few others went around in that. He then goes to Hong Kong, and you'd think with those sort of credentials, that, he's probably going to be winning races for fun. Here he is as an 8-year-old. 49 starts later, he's finally won one. But here's the thing. And I was having a look at this. And I know he's been around for a fair while, well, for a few years, and a fair bit longer than, say, Serpentine, the Derby winner. But he has won £420,000, this horse, despite the fact he's had 49 starts and only won one race. I think, I'll stand corrected, and again, I know Serpentine's only been around for 2 minutes, comparatively speaking, but I think he's won more prize money than the Epsom Derby winner. Now, you kind of think if a horse takes 49 starts to win a race, even if it's a 15-year-old, it shouldn't have as much money in the bank as a Derby winner. But it just goes to show you how good the prize money is over there, and because he keeps picking up prize money, he probably, I would imagine, if you did the math, what's he been, 6 years over? The connections are probably well over 150,000 pounds in front on the on what it's cost to train him. Obviously, I don't know what he cost to buy, and I would imagine given his 2-year-old form, he probably cost a pretty penny. But since he's landed in Hong Kong, he's probably on the right side of the ledger.
So talking about the horses who perhaps sometimes take long to come over in the prize money, is there any sort of reason why maybe we don't see European horses go over to Hong Kong during the season and perhaps leave it late to run the international in December? Is there any reason why we perhaps don't see them go out maybe in sort of the bigger races throughout the course of the season?
Yeah, well, they're only eligible to run around on International Day in the April races. It's like the Derby. You can't have an entry from here because we're talking about the Aidan O'Brien runners. And I was going to say it's very rare that Aidan O'Brien, when I say Aidan O'Brien, Coolmore, I should say, but they'll let a good one go. There's the occasional exception. We'll see them let one go and it'll come out and win a Group 1. I think we spoke about this a couple of weeks ago. Sir Dragonet or Sir Dragonet, depending on who you listen to, is one. Eagle Mountain a few years ago. And there's been a couple of others, but the majority of horses they let go don't go on to any great heights. But I suppose in this case, they can't take one across there for the Derby because it's a locals only a race. So you've got to be an owner in Hong Kong. You've got to be a member of the jockey club. So that's why the Europeans don't go over there. So you look at races, Class 5 handicap horses. Some of them rated 20-something, are racing for £100,000. It's phenomenal. It's absolutely phenomenal. Mind you, as I said, you've got to be a member of the jockey club to be an owner, and from my understanding is it's costly. So but it goes hand in hand. Sure, it's going to cost a bit. Probably cost you a fair bit to train a horse, have a horse in training in Hong Kong as well. But if you get one, as we said, Travel Day took a great example. 48, 49 starts before he wins one, and he banks. I think it's about 400. I think it took him just past the £400,000, not Hong Kong dollars, when he won the other day.
So looking at going back to the Derby itself, we've mentioned about how tightly contested this is, and I always think, compared to sometimes the Europeans, you sometimes get maybe 3 or 4. Like we go back to the English Derby this year. I shouldn't say the English Derby because I know a lot of people don't like that saying. But we look back at last season's Derby where we had English King in there, Serpentine, Pile Driver. There was probably about 3 or 4 who had a proper realistic chance, and maybe there was a handful of the others who made up the numbers. But looking at this field here, there doesn't really seem to be one that's making up the numbers here, and they've all got relatively some sort of squeak here.
Yeah, I think so. There might be 3 or 4 that you'd be a little bit surprised if they won. But to be fair, again, as you pointed out earlier, it is a really open derby this year. We don't, although quite a far. I know Golden 60 was around last year, and that was his first shot at 10 furlongs. I mean, I remember before the Classic series began, they were saying that they might not take him to the Derby. They're sort of thinking about just keeping him to the mile. But this year it is very open on paper as well. It's interesting with the Derby over here. See, I like anyone, I love a good Derby for obvious reasons, but I know that if you're being honest, a lot of derbies turn out to be fairly ordinary races, not just here, everywhere in the world. Normally you'll get 1 or 2, well, I say decent horses. I mean, I'd love to own a horse that was good enough to run around in a derby even at 100 to 1. But if we're talking about the best horses in the world, quite often, sure, you get to see the stars in a horse like that, but quite often Derby winners, or quite often at a Derby, the best horse that comes out of it, like Cracksman, say, this year, isn't the winner, even the next best. Quite often the next, the 2 or 3 that come out of it that turn out to be decent, sort of finish in behind the winner. But yeah, it's normally a fairly open race. And even last year, I know Golden 60 was a warm favourite and he was doing wonderful things, but there was, hindsight's a wonderful thing, isn't it? But he was doing some pretty incredible things leading into it, but he was unknown at 10 furlongs. So there was, that question mark this time last year. But again, it is very open on paper.
We mentioned about the prize money as well. The prize money, I think the total purse for this is $24 million, which is just absolutely incredible. And we looked at racing last year where Royal Ascot's budget was slashed from 6 million to 3 million. It's back to 6 million this year. Do you think that we could look at Hong Kong's model and think that we could possibly try and work to sort of base ourselves around that? Because the prize money, it's well run, it's well funded. And over here, we've seen trainers such as Sophie Leach, national hunt trainer. She's gone to France. The prize money's been poor over here, and she's won a lot of money over in France with horses who perhaps wouldn't, and I mean this in all due respect, perhaps wouldn't do as well over here as they have in France. And it's not me trying to say the standard's poor in France, but the money's just better. So do you think we could perhaps do with a sort of reshake in terms of our prize money sort of behind the scenes and things like that?
I think we need to do a reshake over here, but I can't see how we could replicate Hong Kong. I don't really see how anyone could unless they're starting from scratch. You've got to remember Hong Kong is basically it's a non-profit organisation, so their turnover is going into prize money. It's going into, well, I would imagine a sinking fund for any emergencies like we've had recently, improving. When I say improving, I suppose maintaining and improving the tracks themselves, the grandstands, all those sorts of things, infrastructure. And then, and this is the amazing thing about Hong Kong the Hong Kong model, is they make a lot of donations to charity in Hong Kong, whether it be to build hospitals, whatever the case may be. I don't know the charities exactly, but then what that does is it makes it popular with the average person out there who might not enjoy racing. And as you know, over here, we cop a lot of flack, even when we don't have bad news stories like we have recently. So it's just a system that works well. But you've got to remember, we're talking about 2 racetracks owned by the Jockey Club. Over here, and obviously they've got one of the most powerful tote systems in the world. I was having a conversation actually with a couple of people about, I was saying it sort of like in a joking way when they said that perhaps they'll open everything up over here on the 21st of June. I think it was, I was saying, well, hell, surely they're going to put Ascot back a week so we can have crowds in Royal Ascot. And it was more banter than anything else, but like these things, some people took it a little bit serious and said, oh, you can't move Ascot, you can't do this. And some people saying, yeah, great idea. And John Blance put up a very sort of, well, I thought a potent sort of point, and he said they probably won't, simply because they've done a commingling deal with Hong Kong, and that's worth a lot of money to them, because the people in Hong Kong will bet mad on Royal Ascot. And you tend to find that in most jurisdictions, sure, in Australia they'll bet on Hong Kong and England and vice versa, but most jurisdictions, when you look at the figures, it'd be something like 98% turnovers on the local product, because they couldn't really give 2 hoots about what's going on elsewhere in the world. Hong Kong, if it's on, they will bet on it. Japan, Australia, and over here in England. So it just gives you an idea of how strong that tote system is over there. It would be very, very difficult for us to go down that line because we're not a tote system, even though the tote's over here. And again, it's a completely different infrastructure, far more simplistic, dare I say. They deserve a lot of credit for what they've done. They really do. But to be able to do that over here or anywhere, whether it be Australia, Japan, America, it would be very difficult.
And just talking about the broadcast side of things, whenever I watch Happy Valley on a Wednesday, they tend to split screen. And I always see on social media when there's a jumps meeting on, there's always someone going, oh, why can't we have the full screen this and full screen of that? And I've seen John Blant say many a time before that the contract Sky Sports get with Hong Kong Racing keep the show on the road effectively because they're so good. But with Hong Kong Racing, do you think that's perhaps people not... I wouldn't say showing an interest in Hong Kong racing, but do you think that has an effect and perhaps shows it in a sort of negative light over in the UK because it sort of disrupts the UK sort of flow on a broadcasting day such as a Wednesday?
Yeah, possibly. It's a difficult one because I understand the local product, wherever you may be, has to take precedence. That goes without saying. But at the same time, to have these channels like Sky and Ruck or Racing TV now, you've got to have income. You've got to have turnover. You've got to be doing deals with the local racetracks, with the international racetracks, or when I say racetracks, I suppose the jockey clubs and the people who represent them. And there will be an expectation. You'll say, well, look, we'll pay you this, but we want this, and that type of thing. I know there was a little thing on Twitter recently I got involved in during the week, and I think it was I think it was Lingfield maybe went split with Hong Kong, and they took the call from Hong Kong. But my argument with that is, and I agree 100% that even if it's a rubbish race on the local scene, I'm not saying the race at Lingfield was, but even if it is, I know that takes precedence. It turns over more money. That's where people have got their interest, but they're still interested in the other product. And my argument for that one was, I think the race at Lingfield was 10 furlongs, maybe even further. They were, if I remember correctly, just before the halfway mark. And I think the idea was that the Hong Kong race was 6 furlongs or 5 furlongs. It was a short race at Happy Valley, was to try to get the best of both worlds. The Lingfield race, again, it had 5 runners. Now, to me, that's like a greyhound race. By that, I mean, you know exactly where your runner is once they've jumped because it's only 5 runners. And you're probably familiar with the cuttles over here as well. In Hong Kong, you would have had 12 runners at Happy Valley. That's the maximum field. You're probably not overly familiar with them. For the people that have had a bet there, without the commentary, they've probably got no idea where their runner is, or little idea. Whereas at Lingfield, you just go, well, there I am. I'm in 3rd spot on the rail. Hopefully it gets a run. So I kind of understood it. I think that's the incident you're talking about. I understood it. It's not up to me. I don't work in the corporate side. But I understood that, and I thought it was a sensible decision. But I think the majority of the time you've got to prioritise the local meeting. The one thing I did say, someone involved in production said, well, the reason we made Lingfield small and Happy Valley large is because if we gave the audio at at Lingfield, and it's in the small box, it would nearly, because the Happy Valley was the large split screen, it would confuse people because you'd expect the audio to come from the larger one. So, but in the end, there was a bit of discussion about it, and I think people sort of understood both views. It's kind of, again, it's one of those ones that I don't think there's any wrong or right. It's a bit subjective. I kind of agree, and this is my neutral hat on. As a punter, I agree with what they did in that situation because we did get Happy Valley, and then we got a good half of the race at Link. Well, when I say we got the entire race at Lingfield, but we got the half of the audio as well.
I mean, I'm watching the coverage. I mentioned this a couple of weeks ago. The presenters, when they talk, I mean, I know John Blant's worked in Hong Kong for a couple of years, as recently as 2018, I think it was. So he's quite clued up about the whole scene there. And whenever I watch someone, I'm like Alex Hammond or someone like that, they always are quick to mention Joe, Zac, but never anyone else. And I just think to myself, is that because of a lack of knowledge of the area, of the sort of scene? Because there's so many good riders who are sort of underneath. We mentioned this before, and I just feel it's perhaps a bit of a, I wouldn't say a kick in the teeth for them, but it can sometimes just be like, well, come on, I know they're very good, and that's completely fine saying that, but there's other guys. It's like come over here and saying Frank Dettori, Ryan Moore, Sheen Murphy, they're your 3, and everyone else is, disregarded. But it just becomes a little bit like, I wouldn't say infuriating. I think that's quite harsh, but it's just like, there's other jockeys there and other good. I'm waffling on a bit here, I must admit, but yeah, we'll go with that because I'm just going to ramble on otherwise.
In defence of a few of the presenters, you got to remember they've got to be across a lot of things. And John's the out of the presenters doing the daytime shifts, John's the Hong Kong expert, and that's why he does Happy Valley every Wednesday, and I do it for ATR. If you went to Australia and you mentioned anyone outside of Ryan Moore, Tom McQuan, probably Holly Doyle these days, Frankie Dettori and Asheen Murphy, that's riding at the moment, they probably wouldn't know who you were talking about, to be fair. The majority, anyway. And I think that's the way it works both ways. The other thing you've got to remember, too, is when you look at the stats, they're the two people riding, the most winners and by some way. So if you're sitting over here and you know a little bit about Hong Kong, maybe not a lot, and Zac Purton's just ridden a 5-timer, Joe Moreira's just ridden a 6-timer and this sort of thing. Well, they're the people in the spotlight. But there's no doubt, I've said it a million times. I remember when I was riding that some of the riders that were getting the spotlight, they were obviously good riders, but I remember some of the riders who weren't getting the spotlight, believe you me, in the jockeys room, they were just as highly respected, because when you're out there, you kind of know. You just know who's really good and who's maybe really good but is having a bit more luck than the other one, if that makes sense. I've always said I don't actually think there's a hell of a lot of difference between people that we consider to be elite riders and the next rung down. Normally, it's obviously the cattle they jump on, and I don't care who you are. If you're on a slow horse, you're on a slow horse. Simple as that. But they get more opportunity because they might be well connected. They might be good, gift of the gab type of thing. And then because they get more opportunity, their confidence builds up. And when they're younger as well, the only way you learn to ride races is going to ride races, So the more you do it, the better you get at it. And the thing, if you put Frankie or Ryan or all those people we mentioned on a favourite in the Derby, there might be a little bit of nerves there, but it's not going to be much because they've been there and done that so many times. You put someone on that's having their first ride in the Derby or have only sent around a couple of 100-to-1 shots, and all of a sudden they're on the 6-to-4 favourite in the Derby, unless they've got ice running through their veins, chances are they're going to have major butterflies, probably for the whole week leading up. So it just sort of comes down to experience. But look, I know what you're saying. The other thing is in Hong Kong, the local riders are given a really good ground in, and they're probably underrated. I mean, Matthew Poon at the moment's riding winners for fun. We know Vincent Ho's a very good rider. He's had a good impression when he came over here. Jerry Chow, very, very good young rider, certainly worth his £7 claim. But then the other riders that come in from international areas, they've got to have done something. They've got to achieve. You can't just knock on the jockey club's door and say, hey, I've ridden a few winners. I go, all right, can I ride over here? That's not how it works in Hong Kong. You've got to have already reached a certain level. So it's. I think the majority of the time, anyway, if you're an owner and you threw your silks into the room, into the jockey's room in Hong Kong, I don't think you'd be too disappointed too many times, no matter who walked out with them on.
I mean, sticking with this whole young riders and jockey situation, it's like the national hunting over here. I watch a lot of it. I know quite a few of the young jockeys. We've got Cheltenham coming up next week, and there's quite a few young riders who I speak to and interview at the races and stuff like that. And I think they're top riders. I think they're really good. And whenever they ride a big winner on TV or whenever they get a chance, they don't get mentioned enough. And I think to myself, they can ride better than some of these pros can, and I can see that. And they don't get enough opportunities. And do you think that's the sort of same thing in Hong Kong, or do you think opportunities are sort of? I mean, obviously Zac, we mentioned this before. Zac and Joe dominate the whole scene, but do you think opportunities out in Hong Kong are harder to come by than perhaps over here? Because I know at Cheltenham there'll be probably a conditional, or there will be conditionals because the amateurs can't ride, so they're going to get more chances this year. But it would be very rare to see a conditional in a champion hurdle, for example. We had one last year on 100-to-1 shot, but I doubt we'll see it this year. But would you say there's more opportunities for the younger jockeys in Hong Kong than there would be over here?
I think the young riders are given an opportunity while they've got a claim. Like a lot of places, once that claim goes, they can find it very tough. At the moment, you can have Jerry Chow claiming £7. Not long ago, he was claiming £10. And I don't know the exact number. I can't remember. But I would say he rode at least 50 winners in Australia before he came back to Hong Kong. Now, his £10 was gold. But in the not too distant future, he won't be claiming it at all. And he's got to now ride against Zac Purton, Joe Moreira, Blake Shin, Carroll I, and all these wonderful riders from around the world. And that's where it gets a little bit tough for the local riders over there. But they can do it. We've seen it. I mean, Tony Cruz had a wonderful career in the saddle, wonderful career as a trainer. Vincent Ho, he's kicking golds everywhere. It's not just Golden 60. I mean, Golden 60 is taken him way up here, but he was riding winners before Golden 60, and he's certainly ridden plenty around him. And I remember he came over here. I'm sure he rode a winner at the Shergo Cup a couple of years ago as well. And
I think he did. Yeah,
sure he did. And he also, I'm sure he did a little stint over here, I think, with Mark Johnston, if I remember.
It was, yeah. I think he rode the winner at Cattrick. I think he went to Beverley as well. So there too, really, Beverley's the tightest track you probably get in the UK. So.
And they're very dedicated to what they do, the Hong Kong riders. And the other thing is, too, they're naturally very polite. You never see them, or very rarely anyway. There'll be one or two incidents, I suppose, if you go back far enough, but you rarely see any controversy around a rider from Hong Kong. So, but again, as I said, for the apprentice riders, the difficulty is that I think at the moment you've got 20-something riders over there, maximum field 14 at Sha Tin, 12 at Happy Valley. So obviously there's probably 8 to 10 riders per race not having a ride. And once you lose your claim, you're up against some of the best in the world. So that makes things difficult.
Right, so we'll kick on into Sunday now. I think I waffled on a little bit too much for my liking there. So we'll kick on into Sunday. The racing post haven't got the cards up, so I'm having to go on the website and just try and find my way through the race card here because it's sort of in Chinese as well as English. But we'll look ahead to race 7. It's the Lantau Island Handicap. It's a Class 1. Hot King Prawn leads the way. Subsequent recent Group 1 winner last time. They now refer to him as the Group 1 Prawn. He trialled during the week. We've got the likes of Buddies in here, Skyfield, Wellington, Voyage Warrior, Big Party, Computer Patch, and Regency Legend. Hot King Prawn should be the one to beat here, shouldn't he?
He should be, but let's not forget he's giving away between 11 and 20 pounds. This is a handicap. The Group 1 was weight for age. He has proven in the past. I mean, he weighs in at around about 1,250 odd pounds, so he's a big boy himself, and he has proven he can carry weight. I personally think he's probably worth opposing on the weekend, just because he's got to give away so much weight. Don't get me wrong, I think he'd be there or thereabouts, and I certainly wouldn't be surprised if he won. I'm not saying go on well, you can't go on the exchanges, but you know what I mean. If you could, I'm not saying he's a lay, but chances are, you've got John Size, Joe Moreira, Group 1 winner last time out, and Classique Legend aside, until we see what he does, this is the best 6 furlong horse in Hong Kong. But again, we're talking about a handicap, and he's got to give away a lot of weight. So I'll be looking elsewhere.
So look, we've just touched upon Hot King Prawn. He's relatively quite a solid horse. He never really runs a bad race. He's always in and around sort of the top level. But looking at the rest of the field here, the likes of Buddies, who took on Kaying Star last time and perhaps blew out too early here. Looking at the rest of the field here, would there be anything else that perhaps you jump out at? I mean, Zac Purton's aboard. Just looking at the race here, I've not had much time to look at it, but Zac Purton's aboard Regency Legend here. So looking at the rest of the field, where would perhaps you be looking to try and take on Hot King Prawn with?
The one you just mentioned, Regency Legend. He was second in behind Hot King Prawn last time out. I think he was about 2 lengths behind him, or a length and a half behind him. But that was his first run in 13 months. Now, this horse hit the scene big time in Hong Kong. He won his first 4, and then he was turned over 3 times at a higher level, and then he was off, obviously, with a problem to be off for 13 months. To pitch him straight into a Group 1, I thought was, it took plenty of intestinal fortitude, might be the polite way to say it, and to run as well as he did was hugely impressive. And I know that Zac has jumped off Voyage Warrior. Zac normally rides Wellington as well, but he wouldn't make the weight on Wellington to ride him. Now, given that he's 12 pound better off this time, and I suppose you would have to think that he's going to come on a panel for that first up effort. I mean, people talk about second up bounce and whatnot, but you'd have to work on the theory he's entitled to improve. The other thing is, too, given the way he ran last time, he's probably going to be suited if they run along a little bit. They normally do in these sprints. There's a couple here that will run along quickly enough. You'd think the race is going to set up very nicely for him. If he can take just even a length or 2 improvement out of his last run, well, you don't need to be a genius to work out the 12-pound turnaround. Should be enough to turn the form around Hot King Prawn. I think he could be the one to beat, but it's a good little spread. I mean, Wellington, he's on 113 pounds. He's got no weight here. This is definitely his acid test, but they're talking about him potentially being a Group 1 sprinter. He's one of the young guns, a Group 1 a sprinter going forward. And again, as I mentioned a moment ago, people look at the form and say, well, Zac Purton normally rides him. He's not on him here, so he's got no faith. Zac doesn't do 113. Zac does about 118, maybe a pound or 2 less for some of the bigger races on the odd occasion. But yeah, it's a good little spread. I think Regency Legend, based on that effort last time out, when he was double figures, I think it was around about 25 to 1 on the Hong Kong tote. But based on that, it looks like they've got him back to that early promise he showed.
Looking at the handicaps over in Hong Kong and Australia, they have Class 1 handicaps, and I know in Australia last week, the new market, which is a Group 1 handicap. We don't see that over here. So for people at home, perhaps, what's the difference between a Group 1 handicap and, say, a standard Group 1 you get over here, for example, in the UK?
I think they're a great idea. I've said for a long time. They don't necessarily have to have a Group 1 next to their name, but I think you should have valuable handicaps because they end up producing stories, and that's what you want. You want to see Pride of Penzance 100 to 1, Lady Rider aboard, and to the best of my knowledge anyway, Marie Payne is Still the only lady rider in the world to have ridden the premier race in her nation. And I think it's difficult when you're talking Melbourne Cups, Caulfield Cups, Newmarket handicaps. I mean, they're quality handicaps. So, yeah, I suppose you'd say the average Joe Blow probably isn't going to have a runner, but it gives you an opportunity. You see a lot of these big handicaps now contested by horses that are in syndicates. I mean, say you, me and a few mates got together and bought one. We'd be far more chance of getting a horse into one of those big handicaps than we would in the Derby over here. You just don't see that happening. And I've always said it doesn't matter what the sport is, passion sells any sport. Without passion, you haven't got a professional sport. And what creates passion? Well, a few things, but one of the things is these wonderful stories, and that's what we need. And that's why I'm a big fan. If you go back years ago, handicaps were massive. You know, the biggest races in the world were handicaps. Now, I understand, I'm a great supporter of the weight grade system because we want the best against the best, basically on level terms with weight allowances to see who is the best. But handicaps serve racing really well. I know not long ago over here, there was one or two trainers saying they should do away with handicap racing. And I just went, oh, my God. I mean, if you did that, you'd destroy racing, certainly as we know it. But, yeah, I'm a big fan of them. As I said, they don't necessarily have to have the Group 1 status next to them, but I'd love to see a few £1 million handicaps over here. I really would.
When looking at the handicaps over here, especially we'll talk about Royal Ascot, for example, we have the Hunt Cup, the Sandringham, and races like that. In recent years, I sort of thought the quality of them perhaps isn't as strong as it used to be, because more often than not in the past, I remember at the Stewards Cup a few years ago, there was a horse of Robert Cow's called Intrinsic, and he absolutely hacked up in it, and he was the famous phrase, a group horse in a handicap, that so many people use when a horse hacks up in a handicap, they always wax lyrical about it, get excited, and the horse didn't really show anything after that. But I just thought the handicaps over here, the quality is perhaps not as high as it used to be. Like, for example, the Hunt Cup last year, I don't think it was as good of a race as I've seen before in it.
Yeah, but the thing is, that comes back to prize money again. I mean, the Melbourne Cup, what is it, 8 million Australian? I think that's about £4.5, £5 billion. You start putting £1 million plus on handicaps, and believe you me, you'll find that there'll be some pretty good horses going around in them. Look, I know what you're saying, because the horses over here, you've got to remember the big players over here, they're basically creating stallions. That's what they're doing. Or, fillies of the future dams, that type of thing. It's always been a bugbear of mine. I hate the fact that they don't allow geldings to go around in the Arc. I think that's disgraceful. That's 1850. At the moment we want the best against the best. If you remember, Sirius Zagley, that wonderful French
horse, Corinne Barber trained it. Yeah.
Well, I was over there when he won was it the Prix d'Olle, that race he used to win just about every year on Arc Day, when it tipped down rain, and he was a mudlark. It's over 10 furlongs. Honestly, he won it by so far you could barely see the second horse. And here he was going around on the Saturday in that, because he couldn't go around in the Arc. And I remember thinking that year he would have been a massive player in the Arc. Imagine having the best horse in France at the time, not going around in the best race, not just in France, but what many people, myself included, think is the best race most years anyway, in the world, and because he's a gelding, and it's all the protector breeding industry. What a load of rubbish. How many geldings can you think of over the last 20 years would have even got into the race? He's one. There might be one or two others, and most of them are from other parts of the world, like Australia, and no horse outside of Europe's ever won the Arc. So it's just it's a silly rule. I mean, who's to say a horse like Kingston Town, Might and Power, all these wonderful geldings, they could have been sent up. I'm not saying they'd win it. I'm not silly. I know the best middle distance horses in the world, or in Europe, and in Japan for that matter. But occasionally somewhere like Australia do get a pretty decent one. We've seen it, got to loosen up on the Japan Cup, for goodness sake. We saw what So You Think did, although he still had his plums. But the point I'm saying is, it not just add a bit more interest if a horse, I mean, Kingston Town, his 3-year-old season in Sydney, not many horses I've ever seen would have beaten him that year. It just added a bit of interest to the race. But look, now I'm going off in a tangent, because it really annoys me when they restrict these races. At the end of the day, the Arc should just be the best, full stop. No sort of, no criteria that says you can't run in it because you missing a certain part of your anatomy. I don't care if you've only got 2 legs. If you're good enough for it, you should be going around in it.
I mean, stick with the whole syndicate scenario as well. We'll talk about that as well, since we're on that topic. On the flat, I rarely see a syndicate have a horse in a big race compared to the jumps. And it's probably because the big boys like Coolmore, your John Goslings, Godolphins, they source that better quality 2-year-old, 3-year-old, and then they develop into an older horse. But on the guarantee at Cheltenham this week, we're going to have probably a syndicate with 1 or 2 horses. There's a syndicate on Twitter who've got one in the Fred Winter, was trained by Gordon Elliott, but now with the woman who took over, whose name I forgot. But On the flat, we don't really see many syndicates. We see them in the handicaps, and Sabusca was an example of that. Every time he ran in the handicaps at Royal Ascot, Goodwood, ITV got all the owners on Zoom, and it was fantastic. And I just think to myself, I wish we could see more of that at a Derby or a St James's Palace at Ascot or a King's Stand at Ascot or a Gold Cup at Ascot. And it's just something that perhaps we just don't see enough of.
I think what tends to happen, it gets back to the point I was making about the passion. There's no doubt we want, to be straightforward, we want wealthy people in the game, and they deserve success. They pour a lot of money into it. Hey, they might be making a lot of money on the breeding side of it, but fair play to them. That's the way it should work. But the problem with it is, and I'm not going to name names, but you know exactly what I'm saying here, is once you've won every big Group 1 race in the world, you want to win several times over. You're looking at it purely commercially. You're going, well, he wins the race. Say a horse wins the Derby. Oh, yes, well, we always knew he'd stretch out to 12 furlongs, but he's pretty sharp as well. He'll run 10 furlongs. He's probably one of the best horses that we've had for quite some time. He's going to make a wonderful stallion. When you get a syndicate, and a good example is the syndicate owned Red Cell that won the Everest, $15 million. I think it was $12 million the first year. He won $15 million the next. They're not going, well, yes, we always knew he was a good sprinter, and we always had a lot of faith. I'm pretty sure he's gelding, actually, so we can't talk about the breeding side. What they're doing is I was next to them when they won the first one, actually, and there's people just shaking and crying, and I'm talking about grown men. And when you get that on film and it's on the news, as it is in Australia, because we're a little bit more favourable, the general public to racing than the general public are over here, but it sells the sport. Whereas sitting there talking about them being a future stallion in a calm manner, which is absolutely fine, don't get me wrong, it doesn't. Now, we want the Derby to be the way the Derby is, when we want all these big races. And the wonderful Group 1 races we do have over here, and you have some soft Group 1s all around the world, I know that. But when you're talking about the Arc and the Derby and the Oaks, and you're talking even the St Ledger, I know cops a bit of flack, but I love the historical aspect, and I love seeing some of these 3-year-olds trying to stretch out a bit further. But you talk about the Prince of Wales, the Eclipse, the wonderful meeting that's Royal Ascot, which for mine, without a shadow of a doubt, is the greatest flat meeting in the world. We want all of that, but I just think what we should add is, if we can, is valuable races that the average person, when I say the average person, all right, it's going to be difficult because you find in the Melbourne Cup now you're having to take on the Europeans, and there's people like Joseph O'Brien starting to win the race, which is great, don't get me wrong, it's a wonderful story in itself. I'm not trying to take anything away from that, but you're still going to get a story like Marie Payne winning the Melbourne Cup, on a 100-to-1 shot, because it is a handicap, even though it's a quality handicap. And I think that we would be serviced well if we had some valuable handicaps over here. The other thing you've got to remember, and the Derby's got to have big prize money, so is Royal Ascot, because that goes hand in hand with a big meeting. But the bottom line is, a horse that's winning the Derby, a colt that's winning the Derby, sure, you and me would love to win the prize money, but that's not where the real value is at. The real value is when they go off to the breeding barn. That's why sometimes you'll see a horse win a Derby, and might have been, maybe the connections don't think he's as good as what some other people do, and all of a sudden they're retired 2 minutes later. So for the sake of the sport, we really could do some, I want to say valuable handicaps. I'm not talking £100,000. Let's create a couple of £1 million handicaps. Let's find the money. Let's do it. And over here, the other thing is too, some of them can have 20, 25 runs. I used to do consultation work for one of the leading bookmakers over here when I first came over here, so I was privy to figures. I won't mention the exact figures or the firm because I don't think that's right. But I can tell you now, the big handicaps turn over more money than most of the big Group 1 races at weight for age. That's a fact. Punters love them. Mm. So how much would they love one that's worth £1 million, £2 million, £5 million? And it gets everything from, a yard that's only got 4 runners, that's off, say for instance, you can't get in without an 80 rating. So there, you get them getting their horses in off an 80 mark, and then you get, the big hitters getting their horses in off a 100 mark. And because it's a handicap, normally the horse on 80's got no hope, but now because it's grabbing 20 pounds, it is a hope. So you're still going to have the big yards aiming at it, the smaller yards aiming at it, and theoretically speaking, they're all going to have a chance of winning it. Whereas, no, you and I aren't going to go out and buy a horse for 20,000 quid and win a Derby. I can promise you, Luca. It's just not
have to buy a horse in the first place, let alone buy a horse to run in the Derby.
Whereas, if we buy one that's a handicapper and you've got valuable handicaps, we might be a squeak if we get a half-decent horse.
Just looking at the rest of the card here, at Sha Tin, the second of the Class 1s here is race 2, obviously here. It's Carrying Star More Than This, Champions Way, Fast Most Furious, Kingshield, Playa del Puente, Singapore Sling. Just talking quickly before we talk off the obvious horses here, Kingshield's a horse who I spoke to Zac Purton about a couple of months ago now, and he was being targeted potentially at the Godolphin Mile. He's a decent dirt horse, and I just think here on turf, politely, he's got no chance. He's not a turf horse, in my opinion. He's much more effective on dirt. He's been very impressive on the dirt many a time over in Hong Kong. Would you see him being effective at Meydan in a Godolphin Mile on World Cup night, possibly?
Yeah. Absolutely. I think when he rubs his best, he'd be perfect over there. If you have a look at his overall profile, he's had 3 wins in Hong Kong. He had 2 over here. He was trained by John Gosden. And both the wins were on the all-weather. The 3 in Hong Kong have all been on the dirt. He's never won on turf. Yet, if you go through, I'm sure he went around in St James's Palace and 1 or 2 other pretty decent races as a young horse for John Gosden. He is just completely different when you put him on dirt. And, people will say, well, why is he going around on turf? Well, he's got a rating at the moment of 106. There's not that many races over there for him on the dirt. There's only the occasional one. They've got to keep him fit. What will happen here with Kingshield, famous last words, but he'll come out and basically be a pacemaker in this. He'll go from the front, I would imagine. King Star will sit in second, and that'll be your 1-2 throughout. But he just doesn't let down on turf like he does on dirt. Wait till he gets on the dirt. That's where you back him. He'll be in the old price on the weekend, and rightfully so. But he's a really interesting horse. I wouldn't disagree. I think they were talking about taking him to Dubai at one stage as well, maybe even last year. But with everything that's going on with COVID at the moment, you'd want to be, with the extra hassle, I suppose, you'd want to be pretty confident you go over there and win one. Look, whether he could go over and take out one of the big grade ones, that might be a little bit of a stretch, but he'd be a lovely horse to take over there in the lead-ups, because there's going to be some softer targets in January, February than what there is on Super Saturday or on World Cup night. And given that there's only X amount of targets for him in Hong Kong and there's not that many on the dirt, it's probably because we always say, well, why would you leave Hong Kong? The prize money's so good. But again, there might be only 2 or 3 races during the whole season that he can really target strongly on the dirt.
Do you think this is going to help Carrying Star here with a horse who's going to go forward, so Zac can perhaps just take a pull coming out the gates and just drop in behind, whereas last time Matthew Chadwick on Buddies went right up alongside him, lit up Carrying Star. They were basically head-to-head all the way around. By the time Zac got to the lead, the petrol tank had flashed red and everything coming behind and swamped him in a way. So do you think with Kingshield perhaps being the pacemaker angle, it's going to help Zac get something to turn him into the race?
Yeah, it could. And the other thing is with King Star, this will be the first time he hasn't gone around in either a Group 1, 2 or 3 in 12 months. If this was weight for age, he'd be a very warm favourite here. And he's going to be very much in the betting. But it gets back to the Hot King Prawn points as well. You've got to have a look. He's got to give away 7 to 20 pounds, I think it is here. That's a lot of weight to give away. And the bottom line is, and I kind of made this point when I flagged him up a couple of weeks ago, is that he has got a bit of a profile now where he keeps running well, but he's just not winning. I think he's had the sort of 3 from 20 something like that. I'd have to double check, but I do think the race will set up nicely for him. But the weight he's got to give away to the others does really worry me.
I mean, looking at the rest of the field here, we've got Singapore Sling, Champions Way, 2 relatively decent horses in here. Playa del Puente perhaps will possibly be outclassed in this, I'd imagine. I mean, looking at the rest of the field here, would you be sticking with Carrying Star again, or would you be taking him on with one of the ones we've mentioned here?
No, I like more than this in this particular contest. I mean, it does look a little bit tricky on paper, but he's only had a couple of runs back this season. He hasn't been beaten far in either, over a mile and over 7 furlongs. When you look at his form, 3 of his 4 victories have been over the mile. He's a pretty handy type. He went around in the Classic Series last year, and he was placed in every leg, including running 3rd in the Derby. And then we last saw him, I think it was in June last year, then we didn't see him until January this year, so he's had a decent break. He should be a lot fitter here, and I think he could be worth a play in this. And again, I do think the race maps very nicely for him. I would imagine, you've only got 7 runners here, I would imagine he won't be in the first 4. He'll be somewhere 5th, 6th, 7th. You've got those 2 that I said that we should run them along. I think he'll get every opportunity here, and he is getting, I think it's £7 from King Star as well. He's the second top weight here. So he would be my play in this particular contest.
I mean, looking at the rest of the card here, would there be anything else that jumps out to you from the rest of the races at Sha Tin on Sunday, Tim?
Yeah, there's a couple I do like. If you go to race 6, it's over the 5 furlongs, and they're dropping a horse back here, Harmony and Blessed, I should say. Yeah, you might recognise the name. This is the one that Holly Doyle won on International Jockeys Challenge night.
Yeah,
he's always been sent over the 6 furlongs, and I can understand why, because if you can get 6 furlongs out of a horse, out of a sprinter, it opens up a lot more options. But by goodness, he's always looked like a 5 furlong horse to me. I think he's just won over the 6 furlongs because he had a bit on the opposition. Having said that, 6 furlongs down the track, yeah, fine. But he's a really speedy type, and in each of his races, he's always just struggled a bit over the last half furlong. I think the 5 furlongs, a straight course, will suit him here. He's drawn in 7, which is fine. They tend to go to the high side here. David Hayes has got Zac Purton aboard. I think over the 5 furlongs, he's going to take a lot of beating here. There are 3 debutants we've got to keep an eye on, and the one that would probably jump off the page when you look at the connections is Brilliant Fortune, Casper Founds and Joe Moreira. But he actually came up against Harmony and Bless in the trial. Now, let's put it in context. That's only a trial, and who knows what the connections were trying to do with their horses on the day. But Harmony and Bless beat him fairly comfortably there. Of the others, Valiant Dream, it probably brings the best form to the race outside of the one I'm flagging up. But Valiant Dream, he's a real... I feel sorry for Valiant Dream. If you look at his form, it's second, third, second. Now, his last win was quite some time ago. He's £15 higher in the handicap than his last win, which was 11 starts ago. Now, when he won that race, he went up £5, so he's picked up another £10 for being beaten. He's one of these classic examples. It's not the system, it's not the handicapper. It's just the bottom line is he's a victim of his own honesty. So the other thing we've got here, if we look at the debutantes, I think he's probably got them covered on that. When I say debutantes, they're Hong Kong debutantes. We've seen them elsewhere. And the other form horse, I think he's probably got covered as well. So, yeah, very keen on Harmony and Blessed. I think that's it's in race 6 on the card.
Okay, so that's been the Hong Kong View, guys, episode 4. We'll be back next week for a big Derby special. We're probably going to do the Derby as its own sort of preview itself, and we're going to try and do 2 sort of previews, the Derby and also the rest of Hong Kong as well. We've got some special guests coming in, giving their picks or pre-recorded picks for the race next week. Should be a great race. I'm looking forward to it. I'm sure you are as well, Tim.
Yeah. It's the race. Even though you've got the big grade ones and international, the big grade ones and international day in April, this is the one all the locals want to win.
So we'll be back next week, guys, for a Derby preview, and we'll see you all then.